Oh yeah, this game knows what's up. Okay, this one's going to take a bit of explaining. Today for the Season 7 finale of Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look back at a game which hardly anyone is going to have any experience with, but which I feel is a cornerstone in how we arrived at some of the games we have now. That game being Crystal Pixels. So, to explain why I feel this game is as important as it is, we need to think back to all of the space exploration games which exist, specifically the ones which take place from the perspective of a solo pilot. And one of the earliest was Elite, a game which I haven't yet covered on the show because I've repeatedly run into difficulties researching its history and present status, but it was, in essence, a game about exploring the galaxy and making a name for yourself through conducting trade, taking down pirates, or even becoming a pirate yourself. Many other games would follow using that same formula, such as Starflight, Wing Commander Privateer, Escape Velocity, Freelancer, and even modern games like Endless Sky, No Man's Sky, and one of the sequels to Elite known as Elite Dangerous. However, intermixed in all of that, in the early 2000s, was a game called Noctis, later rebranded to Noctis IV. Up until that point in time, most space exploration games of this nature had fixed universes, but Noctis was special in that not only did it present a procedurally generated universe of massive scope, it also allowed landing on planets and exploring the planet's surfaces, possibly finding various forms of vegetation and animal life. The thing is, though, that unlike almost every space exploration game prior and since, Noctis had no combat or trading features whatsoever. It was entirely about the exploration. And it helped to show that exploring a universe need not be contingent on a risk-reward system, that being able to do it in peace for no gain other than the satiation of one's own curiosity is a formula that actually works. The thing is, though, Noctis didn't come out of nothing. The person who made that game made something else first over the course of several years before ultimately creating Noctis. And that's the game you're looking at now. Crystal Pixels is a pure exploration game. You're given a ship, a galaxy of quote-unquote pixels, named after the single dots they represent from such vast distances, and the goal of the game is simply whatever you want it to be. Explore the place to find all 31 pixel variants as fast as you can, go about charting everything, make challenges for yourself to dock at as high a speed as you can, or start pulling TNT out of the sun and set yourself to task on galactic destruction. This is essentially a sandbox, but it's a sandbox with a glowing wireframe aesthetic and some uniquely creative architecture given the limitations of how this program works, and it's entirely up to the player as to how they want to spend their time here. Crystal Pixels was originally created over the course of several years in the 90s by Alessandro Ghignola out of Italy, who colloquially goes by Alex, so I'm just going to call him that for the rest of the review since I'm bad at pronouncing things, with his original business moniker for this game and Noctis IV being Home Sweet Pixel, and it's effectively a one-player first-person exploration game. However, when it came to the net is kind of an anomaly. Even though Alex had worked on the game throughout a large chunk of the 90s, my research shows it didn't actually hit the net until 2002, about a year or so after he had released Noctis. So even though it's an old game, it hasn't actually been available for people to play for as long as it's existed for. It only supports VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, while in terms of audio, I was told that the original Italian version of the game has music and sound effects, despite the fact that the English port is completely silent. Now, I wasn't able to acquire a download of the Italian version of the game until I was already well into making this video, and wasn't able to figure out how to get the sounds and music working in it, since they rely on special Sound Blaster drivers from Creative Labs, and I couldn't get them working. But I was able to listen to some of the audio outside of the game itself, and yeah, there's a bit of a sentiment that having the audio in the game changes the whole feel of the experience, and I would kind of agree with that. But maybe one day in the future, in modern ports, there will at least be the option to have the audio on or off. Well, I say it that way because not only has this game always been freeware, but you have a couple options for acquiring it. The current home to everything made under the Home Sweet Pixel banner is https://80.style. Yes, I swear this is a real URL, and we'll be talking more about where it goes and what it's all about later in the video. But when you go there, it'll be possible to find both the original early 2000s DOS releases of the game, as well as a modern Windows port, which runs natively without having to use a DOS VM or emulator. And it goes without saying that this game never had a physical release, so no need to worry about that. When you first start up Crystal Pixels, you're dropped into the universe staring at the sun, known as Sunny, while at the helm of your flying craft, known as the Fly. Yeah, I know, creative names, but from here, it's completely open to you as to where to go and what to do. So maybe I should start by trying to make sense of the UI. Although, before we continue, I should mention I am intentionally raising the contrast here in this video to help make it easier to see certain things, as normally the gameplay is a little darker than this. But if you want to actually travel to a pixel and land on it, knowing what all of those gauges down there represent is essential, even if they are a bit hard to make out given the low resolution. From left to right, on the first row, we have the current rate of thrust, the angle you're turned to face from side to side, your height above or below the ecliptic plane in kilometers, and your position relative to the sun along the x-axis. From left to right on the second row, we have your current velocity, your ship's attitude, whereby 0 degrees indicates being parallel and right side up with the ecliptic plane, your distance in kilometers from the nearest pixel, and your position relative to the sun along the z-axis. The physics here are very Newtonian, in that when you accelerate in one direction, you are simply adding velocity in that direction, meaning to slow down, you have to counter your velocity with acceleration in the opposite direction you're moving in. To help figure this all out, your ship produces two special indicators at all times while at speed, one of which is an X symbol showing you your direction of travel, and the other is a crosshatch symbol which shows you your opposite direction of travel. Now you can turn any which way you want with relative ease, but acceleration only occurs in the direction you're facing. Thus, before you can really land anywhere, you need to master how acceleration works. Holding the left mouse button down raises the amount of thrust being put out by the engine, up to a limit of 300 units, which equates to adding 300 kph of velocity per second. Now if you just quickly tap the left mouse button, you'll only increase thrust by a slight amount. Then by clicking the right mouse button, all thrust is cancelled, meaning you'll continue to move in whatever direction you're presently moving in, no matter where you turn to look. And there's also some function keys you can use to aid with this, as pressing F1 will attempt to orient you to face the direction opposite of your direction of movement, F2 will orient you towards your direction of movement, and F5 will always point you towards Sunny in the middle of the galaxy. That said, the math involved to automatically orient the player is kind of wonky and can be disorienting, so I find it's often better to learn how to manually turn to face these directions. So now that we have the controls down, the trick is to plot a course to a pixel and dock with it. Really, any pixel will do, though you may be tempted at first to pick one of the larger blobs of pixels thinking they're closer, when the reality is that that's just an effect unique to certain pixels in the simulation, which are supposed to have atmospheres, and it doesn't mean that they're closer or further away. Well, one of the best ways to accelerate towards a pixel is to point yourself somewhat away from the pixel you want to go to in order to help drag the X indicator into the pixel itself, since if all you do is accelerate straight at the intended pixel, any prior velocity you had is going to end up being maintained. Now as you get closer, eventually the targeting lines will show up, and the distance indicator on the UI will show you fast approaching that pixel. At this point, it's best to immediately point in the opposite direction of travel and slow yourself down. And if you overshoot, try not to accelerate too quickly in your attempts to get back. Patience at lower speeds are more likely to get you docked than trying to brute force it. Once you're in docking range of a pixel, all you do is press F4, and you should see the docking message show up on the UI while the ship automatically lands itself in an appropriate spot. Then from here, you can press F3 to disembark and begin walking around the pixel to explore it by using the left mouse button. Although really, some pixels are so simple, there won't be too much to see, but even the simple ones often have a few interesting things of note. For starters, each pixel has a number somewhere which indicates where it was in the generational order, as 250 pixels are generated by default, from 0 to 249. Many pixels also have messages hidden somewhere, or may even have randomly generated objects of various kinds strewn about, which you can pick up and drop using the page up and page down keys. Though heavy objects require that you turn on caps lock to lift them, so as to avoid moving them accidentally when trying to manipulate other smaller things. And once you're done exploring a pixel, simply walk back to your ship, hit F3 to board it, and hit F4 to undock and release yourself back into open space. You also have the ability to climb up to higher ground, though sometimes this can be a little finicky to get working with larger inclines, though you should be able to handle most elevation changes. Now, some of the objects you find may also have special properties, such as writing boards you can write messages onto, which will be saved to disk, allowing you to read them again later, with each message saved and loaded on a per pixel basis. The trick here, though, is that the messages and writing system only works so long as scroll lock is enabled, meaning if you have one of those newfangled keyboards which decided scroll lock was too antiquated to be of any use to anyone, that might be a problem. Also, it can be kind of hard to read the messages. There's supposed to be a magnifier object which can make it easier to look at things, but I've never been able to get it to work right for whatever reason. However, the microcosm generated is not a fixed system. You can add to it and change it to your desire, and this is where Sunny comes into play. Now, as you enter Sunny's atmosphere, a yellow haze will begin to fill the screen. While in Sunny's atmosphere, you can use the page up button to cycle through various objects to carry with you and place wherever you want, though dropping objects in the middle of nowhere will make them nearly impossible to ever find and retrieve. Or, if you want to plop a brand new pixel into the universe, flying through the very center of Sunny will cause you to drag a new pixel out from within, which will then be tugged around until you reduce speed to below 10 kph, at which point the pixel will be cast free and will now be floating in space where you left it permanently. Or until you blow it up. Yet one of the objects you can retrieve from Sunny is good old-fashioned trinitritylene, known better by its acronym, TNT. Since we're dealing with Newtonian physics, this means if you're carrying an object and drop it while in flight, that object will continue moving in the same direction and at the same velocity. Now, if you drop TNT at speed and allow it to slam into an existing pixel, that pixel will get obliterated, permanently removing it from the simulation. Well, unless and until you reload the game or a previous simulation file, as the game supports saving and loading the entire state of the simulation by pressing left shift plus any alphabet letter from A to Z to save a simulation state, or right shift and any alphabet letter to load a simulation state. Now, being able to save and load states was pretty much required to learn how to make my own pixel for sake of this video. I mean, obviously a game from 2002 is not going to know about the existence of this ancient DOS game series, which I started in 2010, but all of the definitions for the various pixels and objects are stored in plain text, and you are more than capable of going in and adding your own content. The only catch is that despite there being a decent number of commands for creating your own stuff, there are a few limiting factors. One thing I was never able to quite get used to is that dimensions are always expressed as a radius. So even when making a box, setting it to be a size of 20 by 50 by 30 actually makes it 40 by 100 by 60. Another thing that's going to dictate how you make your pixels too is that when dealing with text, so long as the text string runs along the x-axis, you won't have any problems. But the moment you want it to run along the z-axis, attempting to rotate the text causes the individual letters to reverse themselves. Thus, to get it to look right, you have to print the letters in reverse order. And this is why when you look at some of the pixels in the definitions file, you'll see text written both ways on some pixels, as some of those are X-aligned and some of them are Z-aligned. Now, there's a few other things I want to talk about too, which are a little less obvious, one of which are those atmospheres I mentioned earlier. Now, originally, the game came with specially formatted bitmaps which can be rendered into the background of certain pixels once you landed on them to provide an atmosphere of sorts. And you could tell which pixels would have these atmospheres ahead of time because from a distance they would be more of a blob of real pixels rather than just a single dot. The thing is, though, pretty much every distribution of this game I've found online up to now lacks the appropriate files, so when you dock with a pixel with an atmosphere, nothing shows up in the background. However, while getting this video together, I was able to ask Alex about the backgrounds, and he managed to dig up and provide me with the original .atm files, thus allowing us to see how this effect works in the game when you land on an appropriate pixel. To be fair, I kind of understand why this effect wasn't really integral to the experience, as it kind of causes the actual geometry you're standing within to disappear into the background. Not to mention, the ATM files themselves are relatively large compared to the rest of the game, which would have led to longer dial-up download times and would have eaten into what little free web hosting space us website authors had back then. But it's now the future, and a couple megabytes are trivial. Thus, I have made the ATM files available to download through a link in the video description in case you want to give them a try. Though you can also grab them from the AD.style website as well, or pull them from the Italian version of the game now that that's been made available too. There's 5 ATM files in total in the zip archive, only 3 of which are used by the game by default. However, the English translation renamed a couple of them, so I've also added a text file to the zip archive so you can rename the appropriate files. As for how to make them, they're basically just raw bitmap data without the BMP header, and a grayscale value range of 0 to 31 per pixel. Beyond that, there's also 2 special objects you can sometimes find when you dock with a pixel: the photophoe and the orbital engine. Not to be confused with the object claiming to be the orbital engine, but really isn't. The real orbital engine is basically a spinning starburst shape, which, when present on a pixel, causes that pixel to orbit around Sunny. Now, landing on an orbiting pixel is actually pretty challenging since the pixel is constantly in a circular motion, something your ship is incapable of replicating since it's not affected by gravitational forces. But because this is a video, I was able to do some time lapses and found that these orbits, while circular, don't actually rotate the pixels themselves, only their position. This means if you set yourself onto an orbiting pixel and leave it running, the visuals end up being kinda curious, but also completely understandable. As for the photophoe, that's not just a screen name Alex used to go by, but it's also the teddy bear you see during the title sequence, which also makes an appearance as an object on some of the pixels. And what's special about it is that if you carry another object over to it and drop that object on top, that object will be duplicated, almost like a photocopier, am I right? Yeah? Anyone? Okay, in all seriousness, I asked about the name, and it turns out Alex really does have a teddy bear with that name, as he first chose the name just because it sounded fun, then later retconned the name to be something that sounded like the number 44. Like photophoe, 44, I mean, it's a little silly, but I get it. Besides, nowadays he goes by the screen name of Furball with 2 R's, just like the cat from Tiny Toon Adventures. Either way, he seems to have led a fairly fluffy lifestyle, in some manner or another. And in fact, since that's the topic we've landed on now, and since I've pretty much showcased all the main and hidden features of this game, let's go on a little side trip. If there's one thing Alex is known for now besides Noctis IV, it's for not having typical websites. I mean, sure, he started out on GeoCities just like many of us who were on the net in the 90s, but his websites since have evolved to feel less like websites and more like entire computer systems, with this current website, AD.style, being another such example. And it's essentially a blog site anyone can use and create their own blog space within, along with chat features and content uploading. And I've even created my own little space there, which admittedly I probably won't be contributing to very often, since I have my own website to worry about. But the standout feature of the AD.style site is built right into it, and is considered to be the spiritual successor to Crystal Pixels, known simply as the Array. The Array is essentially a vast 3D world which is community built, though given that the community here is incredibly small, very little has actually been done within the Array thus far. But if you go exploring, you will indeed find a number of things. Plus, once you create an account, you can add to the Array yourself. Though the controls to do so can take a little getting used to since, just like with Crystal Pixels, this place is designed more so to be an experience than to be any sort of exacting 3D modeling tool. In fact, you can't actually do any modeling within the Array. You either have to place prefabricated models or import your own, though you can plant text strings into the world easily enough. While the Array is certainly a neat experience, given that it doesn't use any hardware rendering whatsoever, and that's why it's able to have such a unique look, Because it is entirely community-driven with no procedural content, it doesn't hold the same degree of discovery you get from exploring Crystal Pixels. There's a certain allure in seeing something no one else has seen, or in discovering something on one's own accord, but those facets of exploration are missing from the array by its very nature. Because of that, I kind of feel like the array is less of a spiritual successor and more of an offshoot, one where instead of exploring procedural content, you're exploring user-made content. It's certainly a formula that can work. The site just needs a lot more visitors and a lot more contributors to really turn the array into something you can spend hours on end plotting a course through, at least in its current state. I have thoughts on how those aspects of discovery could be brought back into the array, and I plan to share them with Alex not long after this video goes live. And for those of you who are curious, I have indeed contributed to the array myself, and I'm making sure not to spoil everything you can find there with this video. There will still be plenty of places to explore and things for you to find on your own accord, should any of you visit. Overall, Crystal Pixels is a tricky program to classify. For me, it's one I don't go back to for very long at a time, but when I do, I always enjoy my time with it because I always end up finding things I've never seen before. And even if I don't, just the act of exploring this wireframe world with the possibility of discovering new things really speaks to me in a way that I can't really describe. Not to mention, this program is what led to Noctis, and that program is probably at least partly responsible for the existence of No Man's Sky, a game which had a rocky start but has exceeded everyone's expectations since, given the developer's constant stream of free updates and content. These are all primarily games about exploration, where even the authors aren't too certain of what their games are capable of producing. And that's the heart and soul of an exploration game. Being able to discover things and being able to be the first to say, I found this. But will this game appeal to you? I mean, it really depends. Remember, Crystal Pixels is pure exploration with little else to do. If you need combat or trading intermixed in your exploration, or if the glowing wireframe aesthetic doesn't do it for you, then Crystal Pixels isn't going to be anything special. But if the look of the game is appealing, and being able to explore and see things is its own reward in your eyes, then this is definitely a game you will want to try out. When I started playing the game again for this review, I was running into frequent game hangs anytime I docked with a pixel, and at first I wasn't quite sure why. But after some tinkering with the settings, I realized it's actually a rendering glitch with DOSBox's default SVGA handler, coupled with how this game is accessing the VGA registers. Thus, if you set the machine type to VESA_old_VBE, this should stop the hangs from happening. At least, I didn't have any more after making this change. Though I did notice on rare occasions, rows of real pixels on the screen would glitch out and begin duplicating other rows. Now, this is all stuff I never saw happen on real DOS machines, and I imagine is not a problem with the modern port of the game to Windows. So if you want to avoid all of the glitches, you pretty much have to use real hardware or stick with the Windows port. Other than that, the game needs a high fixed cycles count to run its best. I was using 100,000, and you also have to manually set the core to dynamic mode. Now, I also noticed that the mouse wasn't being auto-grabbed by DOSBox for some curious reason with this game, so you may have to press the Ctrl F10 DOSBox shortcut to manually grab the mouse in order to be able to use it correctly. Lastly, the Italian version of the game needs access to the ct-voice.drv and ctvdsk.drv Sound Blaster driver files to produce sound and music. Yet despite having those files, I wasn't able to get them working. Now, if anyone's able to figure it out, please let me know so I can add those details into the video description. Anywho, that'll be all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games, and that's pretty much going to be it for Ancient DOS Games videos for the year. Although I do plan to put out one more filler video on Saturday, November 8th, just to talk about what's been going on in general, and what to expect for Season 8 of Ancient DOS Games going into the new year. Once again, many thanks to all of you who are sticking around and supporting the show, either monetarily through Patreon, and or socially through likes, comments, and shares. And here's looking forward to a better and brighter 2026. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the people seen here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join in with them and support the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.